good afternoon, or probably good evening, or close to good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for coming and joining us on this event. Right? A full pack of room, right? Very exciting. So before we start, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land we are meeting on, the Wajak people. And I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions they make to the life of this city and this region. Firstly, I would like to also welcome the so many people that who are kindly here with us today, whom I just welcomed three, but I would like to welcome a bit more, right? Firstly, our keynote speaker, the Honorable Minister Bill Johnston MLA, WM Minister for Mines and Petroleum, Commerce and Industrial Relations, Electoral Affairs and Asian Engagement, a busy man, working by the portfolio. Other distinguished speaker is Bonnie Shek, Director, Australia and New Zealand of the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. Welcome, Bonnie. Mr. Tony Chong, Vice President of WA Chinese Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Tony. And also our distinguished guests. Today, right, Consul Xu Yu Zhao Li, Consul from the Chinese Consul General in Perth. Welcome. A few others named that I need to acknowledge here, right? Mr. Eugene Lim, the CEO of Singapore Chamber of Commerce, Western Australia. Ms. Paula Rogers, State Director of the Committee of Economic Development of Australia, SEDA. Mr. Cole Vogel from Forces School Metal Groups and the President of Project Management Institute, Western Australia Chapter. Ms. Esther Oh, right, Managing Director of Asia Resources. Dr. Hendro Fujiono, Director of Fuji Shepherd and Associates. Mr. Oscar Fong, the Belt and Road Initiative Honorary Trade Advisor. And Mr. John Cheto, Director of WYITS Energy. And obviously, our ECU Executive Member, Professor Arshad Omari, is it here yet? Yeah. Yay. Sorry, Arshad. Our Senior Deputy Fed Chancellor, right, Professor Caroline Finch. I'm not sure whether she's here yet already. Probably not yet. Our DPC Research, Mr. Scott Henderson, our Vice President Corporate Services. Welcome, Scott. And obviously, Professor Mariam Omari, our Executive Dean of the School of Business and Law. And surely welcome to so many friends, colleagues, and guests that are, unfortunately, I can't mention here now one by one. Thank you all for coming. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our 6th ECU Business Flashlight today. As a brief background, ECU Business Flashlight is a regular forum organized by ECU School of Business and Law for our academic researchers to engage in a collaborative dialogue with industry and government on issues in business and management. This is our 3rd year in delivering this series of forum, and we are pleased that we have had many distinguished speakers from both Australia and overseas, including government ministers, prominent scholars, and industry leaders. Today's forum has a very interesting topic, insights into the Belt and Road initiatives, and it is a privilege for us to have the Honorable Minister Bill Johnston MLA as our keynote speaker. As I previously mentioned, today we will also have other speakers, Bonnie Shek from HKTD and Mr. Tony Chong from WACCC, thank you. And also another speaker, which is myself, representing ECU School of Business and Law. So I believe this will be an exciting forum, so please sit back and relax, since I now would like to invite Professor Mariam Omari, our Executive Dean of the ECU School of Business and Law, to the podium to formally open the event. Please, Mariam, and take it.
Thank you, Hadrian. What an amazing vibe in this room. I was talking to Bonnie as people were coming in, and she actually made mention of the vibe and the energy in the room. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here with us, and what a turnout. And I know we've got sort of this standing space, basically. Really, it's an amazing initiative, and I want to welcome all of our wonderful guests for their time and sharing their expertise with us so generously at this event. I do want to also give you a little bit of background as to why we're doing this. In the room we have representatives from government, from industry, from business, from professional associations, and quite a few of my academic colleagues who have given their time to be here tonight. It really is a great pleasure to have you here. Our school's mission talks about industry-ready graduates and engaged applied research that we do in the School of Business and Law. And this is an absolute beautiful representation of that. I do need to thank Hadrian as our Associate Dean Research. This event, the Flashlight event, was his brainchild that he came up with 2 years ago when our university went through a significant restructure. And a new school was created, and with that, a lot of enthusiasm, vibe, and energy. And since then, we've been going upwards and upwards. And this was an event that he came up with to bring together the research expertise of the school with industry, because at ECU and at the School of Business and Law, we're all about making the work that we do relevant to our stakeholder groups, and that's you and the audience. And you'll see as we go through how the relevance develops. As Hadrian said, this is the third year we're running the Flashlight events. The first year we started with 2. I put my hand up to do the first one as the Executive Dean. We had 3 last year, and this year we're looking at having 4 of these wonderful events. So please do join us and have a drink afterwards. It's a lovely vibe afterwards as well. We've got a new exciting initiative starting this year as well, which is the ECU Law Assembly. So we're a School of Business and Law. We've taken care of the business side of things, and we're really getting into the law side of things from this year as well. And without saying too much, our Associate Dean of Law is here. We're hoping to have a very exciting speaker for our first of the ECU Business Law Assembly. On that note, I'm going to welcome our first speaker, the Honourable Bill Johnston, with lots of portfolios, but I will read them again. You're a very busy man, so thank you for your time. Western Australia Minister for Mines and Petroleum, Commerce and Industrial Relations, Electoral Affairs and Asian Engagement. A little bit of background as well while I'm going through this. Bill is also a member for Cannington. I worked in Cannington for many, many years. Have held his position since September 2008. Prior to entering Parliament, he spent 7 years as the State Secretary of WA Labor, 4 years as Shadow Minister for Mines and Petroleum, and 5 years as Shadow Energy and State Development Minister. Bill was also a former senior official of the SHOP, Distributive and Allied Employees Association, where he fought for fairness for low-paid workers and industrial rights, workers' compensation and working conditions. So without further ado, can I please ask you to join me in welcoming Bill to the stand?
I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you all tonight. It's very great privilege to be invited to an event like this, and I'm very pleased that you thought to include me in your program for this evening. I begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Noongar people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I want to thank the ECU School of Business and Law for putting on this important event, and I want to acknowledge all the other speakers, Tony Chong from the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, Bonnie Shek from the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council, and of course Associate Dean Hadrian, who's also speaking this evening. And also want to acknowledge Rob Delane, the Deputy Director General of the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, who works with me on the Asian engagement activities of the Government of Western Australia, and I'm very pleased that he's joined us here tonight. And I saw Paula Rogers down the back there from CEDA, and I'm pleased that she's come along as well. Now look, obviously when people are thinking about this Belt and Road initiative, people are right if I move over here, just because this is sort of blocking my view of the audience. When people think about the Belt and Road initiative, you really have to think about where the world's economy came from. Up until 1750, over half the world's economy was actually in Asia in any case. And so when people now talk about the rise of Asia, they're actually missing the point. It's not the rise of Asia, it's the re-emergence of Asia. Asia was, in fact, for thousands of years, the dominant force in world economics. And the Silk Road and the maritime trade routes from Africa and the Middle East through India, Central Asia to China, they were the main trade routes of the world. And that's where the world's economy actually ran. And indeed, there's a lot of evidence to say that the Roman Empire's trade with Asia led to a huge accumulation of wealth in Asian countries, including Southeast Asia, for the first 2 centuries of the Common Era. So, and it just as an interesting aside, that when the city of Angkor in Cambodia had 1 million residents, London had 10,000. So you can see that in fact you've had this long history of Asia being the dominant economic force. It's just that when people with a European heritage learned about history, we only learned about our part of history and not actual world history. And so what we're seeing now is a return to the normal situation for the world's economy from the dawn of history till now. There's only been 250 years where Asia was not the dominant force in world economics. And partly, you can go through a whole range of reasons. Partly it was about the discovery of the Americas, and partly it was about advances in war-fighting technology in Europe. So what we're doing now is actually going back to where a more traditional, more common situation for world history that we haven't had for the last 300 years, but we have had for all of the rest of history. And so, here in Western Australia, looking forward, what do we see? Because the re-emergence of Asia, we're now in the region that's going to dominate world trade in the future. And if you think about a few things, if the last 30 years of world economic development has been about trade between emerging economies and the West, the next 30 years is going to be dominated by trade between emerging economies. And if the last 30 years has been about the export of deflation because of manufacturing in the emerging economies at a much lower cost than has happened in the West. And so, China and other places have been able to make enormous strides in manufacturing, driving down the cost of consumer goods for Western customers. What does the next 30 years look like? And I'd say that it looks much more about services being delivered in those emerging economies as their middle class expands and they start to do the same sort of things, the same sort of consumer patterns that we have in Western economies. So you can see that this is going to be a very changed environment. A couple of years ago, I listened to Martin Parkinson, who's now the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in Canberra. When I listened to him, he was the Secretary of the Department of Treasury in the Commonwealth. And he made the point that Asia, you're going to have 3 demands out of Asia. The first would be energy and natural resources. The second one would be high-valued food, high-quality food. And the third one is branded goods and high-valued services. Australia's always been good at exporting natural resources and energy. That's what defines us, perhaps, particularly here in Western Australia. We've always been pretty good at exporting food from Australia, high-quality food. I might mention that in a minute, a bit further. But the third thing there is the services, the high-valued services and branded goods. We haven't been very good at that space. And what's more is we don't have any automatic advantage in that space that we might have in other areas of commerce and trade. So that's going to be the one that we need to think about most. And this is an interesting, sort of when I say this, you'll say, of course, but if an economy as it develops becomes more services-based, by definition that means that the natural resource inputs into the economy is going to be lower. So if we're dominant in natural resources, that means we're dominant in a part of the future economy that's in decline. Not in
in gross terms, but in relative terms, natural resources become less important to economy as it moves into services. And so therefore, naturally we're going to continue, I hope, the Minister for Mines and Petroleum, going to continue to have a major part to play in that provision of natural resources to our near neighbours, energy resources and mineral and other natural resources. And that's going to be incredibly important to us as a society and an economy. But if we're going to have a share of that other part, that's going to be much more complicated for us to get into that share of the economy. Next thing to think about, in my view, would be the question about digital activity and how can West Australians play a bigger part in the digital future of our region. Now, for reasons that don't matter, I'm an Indonesianist, and I just make the point that when Australians look at Indonesia, we miss the point. Indonesia is a highly technical country. You can't meet anybody without a smartphone in Indonesia. You know, if the pedicab drivers, they sit there playing on their smartphone while they're waiting for the next customer. Indonesians are the biggest user as a percentage of the population of Facebook of anybody in the world, and they used to be the #1 users of BlackBerry. There were more BlackBerry users in Jakarta than anywhere else in the world back when anybody used BlackBerry. So the point I'm just making there is that when we look to our near neighbours, we can't see them as somehow they are at the forefront of technical innovation, and we don't have any particular advantage in dealing with them in those areas. And that's actually quite important to think about. You know, Indonesia's had its first unicorn, its so-called, a digital company that's reached $1 billion valuation, and that's Gojek, which has chased Uber out of Indonesia. I mean, nobody in Indonesia uses Uber, they use Gojek. Indeed, in Singapore, Grab has actually bought out, or Uber is selling its assets to Grab in Singapore because Grab has dominated the market there. So, it's important to understand, and I'm sure many people in this room already did, that we are dealing with great opportunities. And the final thing I'll say in this sort of introductory remarks is when we wake up in the morning, we should be thinking, how can we do trade with Asia? As a government, as a university, as a business community, what we should be wake up every morning and think, what can we do today to develop a trading relationship with Asia? The problem for us is if we're not careful, in 20 years' time, our near neighbours will wake up and not think about trading with us because they have actually no particular reason. Of course, leave aside energy and resources, because obviously we've got a significant advantage that, and I'll talk about food in a second. But in terms of those other things, the things that are growing as a percentage of the economy, that is services, of course everything's growing in absolute terms, but as a percentage of the economy, the services is the bit that's going to grow the fastest. So what is it that we've got? Now, I do want to just return to food for a second. Bulk commodity foods is not going to be a good business to be in the future, because there are other places in the world that are in that business too, and they have a lower cost base. Now, we've got currently in Australia some significant advantages in quality of our volume food commodities, but the application of technology in other countries is going to close that gap very quickly. The other thing to think about is that as a country's income rises, so does its food production. It's one of those unusual things that people don't think about. Land is not actually the big drain, the big hold on increased food production, it's productivity. And you can increase productivity by applying agricultural productivity by applying technology. And as the prices you're able to charge for your consumers rises, as the incomes rise, you can therefore apply technology. You think about this. In the Netherlands, they have piggeries, multi-storey piggeries. So they're producing, bacon and pork in high-rise buildings. And the reason they can do that is because the Netherlands is a rich country and they can afford to pay for premium foods. So naturally, as our region's incomes rise, so actually will their food production. And you think, China feeds 1 billion people, Indonesia feeds 280 million people. These countries are actually already feeding themselves. Our bulk food production is actually quite small. We're dominant in a couple of small industries, like important industries like wheat, where it can't be grown in tropical countries. But actually, and you look at the total volume of food production, I don't remember the exact figure, but Australia's rice production is literally a rounding error compared to rice production in Asia. I mean, interestingly, 1/3 of food production in the emerging economies is wasted before it gets processed. Of course, in Australia, we waste 1/3 of the food after it gets to your fridge. But in emerging economies, it's pre-processing that they lose that. So again, if you apply technology, they're going to have a significant increase in their food availability, not their production, but their availability, simply by getting rid of the wastage before it gets processed and available for market. So don't think of our future as being bulk food commodities, because somebody else is going to get there. And nobody's going to pay a premium for your carrot compared to somebody else's carrot. So what food, the real attractiveness for Australia with food, of course, is our opportunities in high value, high quality food. Now, let me get on to then, having spent all my time talking about my introduction rather than the topic, is so look, if the Asian Development Bank says there's $26 trillion of infrastructure required in our region over the next 30 years. That's an enormous opportunity for Australia. And Western Australian Government, we're trying to think about how we can engage with that. The first thing to say is, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is important in consideration of what's going to happen with that infrastructure. Now, firstly, the first thing that we're going to get a benefit out of that is because there's going to be a lot of steel going into that infrastructure, and Western Australia is fortunate that we are the world's lowest cost producer of iron ore, and that means that that's a good thing. So anything that keeps Chinese steel production up is good for Western Australia. Okay, and we've got 790 million tonnes. 3.7% of Australia's GDP is our export of iron ore. I mean, it is so critical to Australia, we shouldn't underestimate that. So that's a real opportunity for us. Now, the National Government of Australia supports initiatives that are going to improve infrastructure development in our region, but the federal government does make the point that it's important to make sure that infrastructure investment is embracing international standards, embraces accountability and best practice, including social and environmental impacts. And so that's actually quite important to consider in our relationship with the Belt and Road Initiative. But West Australian companies are certainly well placed to participate in those projects. We have a highly advanced engineering and technical capacity in this state. We have people able to manage infrastructure. We have people able to manage logistics chains. If you think about it, our iron ore producers are logistics businesses. So we actually have a lot of opportunities. We have a lot of capacities that are going to work well in that area. We are a world leader in automation. And people don't appreciate the fact that you might read something about a self-driving car in California being tested, but we've got over 300 trucks, driverless trucks, in operation every day in producing mines. That's not in trial, that's actually underway. So think about that as a technology opportunity. And I can go through a whole range of technologies where actually Western Australia is at the leading edge, and not the least of those is battery and new energy technologies, and the government made an announcement about that today. So, you know, we see, as Government of Western Australia, we see the Belt and Road Initiative as potentially a very large trade-enhancing opportunity. And obviously, if you've got enhanced infrastructure, then that's going to aid trade. We're a trade-exposed economy, so to the extent that trade is improved, that will be good for Australia. As if it's increasing the incomes in our region, again, that's a great opportunity for us. We've got the capacities and capabilities. We've got the skills and technology. We've got the learning institutions and the training forums that we're able to be part of the needs of the Belt and Road Initiative. You know, that we can train the engineers, we can train the skilled construction workers, we can do all those things. We have the companies able to participate in the engineering and design work. We've got all those things. So we do think that this Belt and Road Initiative, if it's done in an open and transparent way, that takes account of the needs of local communities and is held to account for the investment that's required, is a genuine opportunity for Western Australian businesses, and the Government of Western Australia, through the department, particularly through the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, and our regional representative officers, stand ready to work with businesses to take advantage of all those opportunities. Now, hopefully we'll be able to say even more in the future, but I make it clear that you know, we support the Australian Government's position on Belt and Road, that it has to be done in an open and transparent manner, with taking account of all the issues, including the impacts on local communities and environmental questions. But it is an exciting opportunity for Western Australia, both in our export of natural resources and our exports of skills and technology from here, and indeed in the opportunities for universities and trading providers here to provide the skills that are going to be needed as countries in our region engage with this Belt and Road Initiative. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you very much. The topic for tonight's event is quite interesting. Insights into the Belt and Road Initiative. I was wondering how many of you actually know what Belt and Road Initiative is? So, how many of you have no clue what is actually Belt and Road Initiative is? So everybody knows. Oh, exciting! That's great, right? But regardless, since I have prepared the slides, right? So I have no choice, right? To basically give you a brief, really brief, right? Basically introduction, so-called, about Belt and Road Initiative, just in case, right? Just in case you probably haven't actually known about it. So, Belt and Road Initiatives, if you like, proposed by President Xi Jinping in 2013. So people said it's a new initiative, just 5 years old initiative. But in reality, it's actually not really new, right? So if we actually come back to the ideas, right, 2,000 years ago, Bill already gave us his history lesson, right? So 2,000 years ago, we actually look at this, what it's called by the Overland Silk Road, right? By a Han Imperial Envoy, and this network of trade route linked China to Central Asia and the Arabic world. So you can see the red, if you like, routes there, and that's basically the Overland Road that actually linked China, that go right through Central Asia to Europe. The other one is called Maritime Silk Road, right? Came about from 1405 until 1433 during the Ming dynasty, different dynasty, and it was during this time that an envoy led by Cheng Ho, maybe you actually know about Cheng Ho, right? Sailed from China to Southeast Asia, Persian Gulf, and all the way to east coast of Africa. Now, why it's named silk? Because at the time, silk was the major commodity, right? Trade commodity, right, from China to go to the regions next, right, or close to China. But for the Maritime Silk Road, it's also called spice route, because not only they actually bring, right, or brought silk, they also brought spices. They also trade spices at the time. So this is modern day Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So if you actually look at this one, right, compared to the previous one, Well, the idea is actually somewhat similar, right? This was initiated by President Xi in 2013. It connects 73 countries now, right? It's actually growing. The belt is the land corridor that passes through Central Asia, again, reaches Europe, and the maritime road connects China and Europe and passes through Southeast Asia, Middle East, and East Africa. So why do we need this? So why do China or President Xi need this? If we combine the two, right, we'll have this. You probably now notice the difference between the old and the new Silk Roads. The old was still there, right, some of them at least, right, but they are actually quite challenging, some of them, right. The new one that is actually planned to be built, right, required infrastructure, obviously, as Bill mentioned, is basically try to create, if you like, binding or bonds, if you like, right, from China, or try to bind China with the close, right, neighbors, if you like, and then go through Europe, right, in a much, right, faster way. That's actually the idea, right? So the new one, right, will basically create really actually big region that actually can work together, right? Much faster, much efficient. That's the idea, right? So these are the 73 countries in the Belt and Road Initiative now, right? China is there, and the other 72 countries are there, right? You notice New Zealand is there, right? So our neighbor, right? But Australia is not there yet. So 5 key goals of Belt and Road Initiatives, right? Facilities, start with probably the facilities connectivity. So we need to build facilities, obviously. Infrastructure is needed because we deal with, say, 73 countries. Obviously, we deal with differences in policies. So policy coordination is needed. Once the facility can be built, good policy coordinations and embedded trade can happen. Right? Trade can happen, financial integration can happen, right? Then after that, people-to-people bonds can happen. And then it goes back and forth. All of them are interrelated, right? Okay, so in short, if you like, or in other words, right, infrastructure is basically the key for now, right? Infrastructure development, it needs to accelerate economic growth, right? So the Belt and Road Initiatives aim to accelerate economic growth across Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Middle East, Europe, and Africa. It requires infrastructure building. It requires policies addressing to allow the smooth flow of goods and trades, right, across this BRI or Belt and Road regions. China so far has pledged 126 billion, right, from the initial 40 billion, right? That's actually they pledged. Now they basically has pledged to US 126 billion US dollar. So these are the key success factors and challenges. First of all, they need physical technology, or in other words, professional competence. China has tremendously built this competence in the last few decades, right? No doubt about it. Right? They can build a floor in a day, right? If you basically see high-rise apartment, they build a floor in a day. Is that right? Yeah. Right? So you, in the morning, you can't see it. The next morning, ooh, another building already, right? One floor. The next morning, second floor, right? So the technology, right, the skill is actually there, right? People may raise doubts about stuff, but it's actually been evidence. The competence is there. So China has it. Then the second one is more difficult, business model, right? Business model that allow this project to be sustainable, and that's actually more difficult, right? The third one is actually more difficult. Social technology, coordination organizations. Why? Because these projects cover, again, so many countries, so many different cultures, so many different policies, right? Social environment, needs, etc., etc. So it's not only economic, right, that involves here, it's also politics, social, culture, and other stuff. And that's actually the things that actually create the most challenges. Skill is there, right? Business model can be developed, right? But the coordination and organization is actually the most difficult one. Hiccups are actually been happening now, right? And that's actually because of the mismatch, if you like, between, right, the ideas and the implementation. So how about the reactions about this in Asia? Let's see Asia first, right? I just pick a few here, right? So Hong Kong and Singapore are very supportive. Bonnie, right, is here, is very supportive, obviously, right? So most South and Central Asian countries are welcoming, right? Most of Southeast Asia countries react positively. That's just an example, recent example. During the Belt and Road Initiative Forum in 2017, Indonesian President Widodo and Chinese President Xi Jinping had a bilateral meeting and they signed several agreements. It's actually mutually considered beneficial. India and Japan are not so keen at the moment, right? So Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has recently declared, right, that India and Japan would jointly develop an Asia-Africa growth corridor. What does actually that Asia-Africa growth corridor look like? I'll show you. Is that the same? No, not really the same. If you actually look at this compared to the Belt and Road Initiative, it's not really the same. But it is quite clear, isn't it? This is actually, quote unquote, a challenge to the Belt and Road Initiative. So they want to make a new one. For what, right? Or why they actually are not so keen? I think for obvious reason that you know. Every concern about Belt and Road Initiative is about, right, the motivation of it. People are worried. People are concerned. Governments are worried, right? That's basically the main cause of it. Western reaction, again, I just pick a few. Businesses are generally positive, right? Bill mentioned that as well. Strategies have been less positive because of what? Because of this, and I show you why. Because government are quite cautious. If you look at that example, just two examples, Siemens, General Electric, they are happy, right? Now, but if you look at the recent, if you like, news, right? For example, the UK Prime Minister Theresa May has expressed reservation about backing this Belt and Road Initiative wholeheartedly, right? So he's being cautious. And this is the new one that's actually rather surprising. 27 of the 28 national EU ambassadors to Beijing have compiled a report that sharply criticizes China's Silk Road project, denouncing it as designed to hamper free trade and put Chinese companies at an advantage. So it's actually, the criticism has been actually quite cool in the last few probably months. Now it has started again, actually, right? So it's become actually a bit warm a bit again. What is his comment now? The presidency's comment on this skepticism and critics? Well, he said the Belt and Road Initiative is not a Chinese plot, as some people internationally have said. It is neither the post-World War II Marshall Plan, nor is it a Chinese conspiracy. It's, if you had to call it something, it's an overt plot, very transparent plot. So if Bill mentioned Australian government is actually support anything that's actually transparent, presidency thinks it's actually really transparent. So what is actually happening there? Right, well, could be miscommunications, could be political reasons, could be different motivations, different needs, right? It's actually interesting for us as researchers. I think it's also interesting to the players, the industry, right, the government as well, in actually looking at this situation. Now, how can Australian businesses get into this Belt and Road initiatives? Bill mentioned it already. Everything that actually creates opportunity is a good thing. Right, so vast network of countries in the Belt and Road Initiative means a bigger pool of opportunity for Australia, especially Western Australia. Right, now one of the ways to gain entry is to form partnerships. Partnerships is very important, right? Especially, right, the state-owned enterprises now that actually within this Belt and Road Initiative often fall short in some, if you like, right, capacity, operation, technology, human resources. And Australia got the capacity to actually jump in and grab the opportunities. Over the next 5 years, infrastructure, right, will basically still be there, but other things come, right? Technology, communications, telecommunication, manufacturing, consumer goods, etc., etc. Once you got the when you build the infrastructure, real estates will also need it, etc., etc. So the opportunity is really, really huge. We mentioned about big businesses mainly, obviously, because we talk about infrastructure. But even with that, obviously small businesses will have a role. Now we go into a bit of my role as a researcher academic, right? And I just showed you one of our piece, right, in the Australia-China Business Review, written by my colleagues Danny Engmers, right, and myself, right, about these ideas of opportunity for Australian SMEs. So there is always opportunities, not only for big businesses, but also for small and medium enterprises, right? But it's not easy to grab. It is difficult to grab, but the opportunities are there. I ask a question: are these SMEs ready? If you basically go even to Hong Kong, right, they're not really ready yet. Right, you go to Singapore, right, the strong supporter of Belt and Road Initiative, they're not really ready yet. Malaysia, you ask them, they're not ready yet. Australia, moreover in terms of what? in terms of the second question there. Do they even know what Belt and Road Initiative is? Right, so if you go to medium-sized enterprise or even moreover small business enterprise, ask them, do you know about Belt and Road? What road? Right, so they basically, where is it? Right, is it close to Canning? Right, so I don't know. Right, so in the sense that, so the ideas of awareness is not even actually high yet or there yet. Right, so how they perceive it is also quite problematic for now. Right, so Danny and I are continuing with our research now, actually to get more responses, right, to basically really actually see really whether these perceptions about Belt and Road is actually caused by the if you like, the lack of understanding of Belt and Road, right, or both because of something else. Is there any risk involved? Right, there are major differences in legal regimes. Right, Krishna know this better than me. Right. So common law versus continental versus Islamic law, right? There are regimes of underdeveloped and low credibility in legal systems. Social judicial corruptions are also common in some countries, and also uncertainty in terms of political and situation and also social situations. And I give you a bit, before I close my presentations, a bit about research. I noticed some of you actually academic as well. So what is the opportunity of this like a Belt and Road to research? If you're in China, wow, this is full on, right? 2015, right? Center for China and Globalization created this Belt and Road Institute. CCG is the top independent think tank in China, ranked 97 in the University of Pennsylvania, right? Independent think tank rating, right? The first independent think tank that actually reached top 100. So this is the top one, so big heavyweight, right? So Hong Kong follows soon. This is also big, right? First research institute concerning BRI established in Hong Kong in 2016, International Academy of the Belt and Road. Okay, they are think tank. How about universities? Look at that, right? Silk Road Research Institute, Beijing Foreign Studies University. Now you go to Fudan. This is top 40 university in the world, right? They got Fudan Institute of Belt and Road and Global Governance. Peking University, even better than Fudan, right? They just 2 weeks ago, right, launched its Belt and Road Institute. So it's a big thing. Hong Kong got also City of University of Hong Kong got that research center. How about Belt and Road in China? Everyone, the government, everyone try to make Belt and Road as their so-called way of life. Right? They actually put the ideas of Belt and Road as a new zone, right, in China. Right, look at this recent, for example, last week, right, 4 days ago, Red News. Belt and Road countries. Right, we got Asian countries, European countries, right, African countries. Now we got Belt and Road countries. Check YouTube. If you actually got little kids, right, they can't sleep, right, there is actually bedtime story about Belt and Road. If you don't believe me, Google it. After this, you Google it, go to YouTube, right, find it, you'll find it. If you want song, they got songs. Songs about what? Belt and Road initiatives. Try it, right? So you will find them. So how about, let's go beyond that, right? This is really recent. Renmin University opened its new Belt and Road School. And look at that, right? They start accepting students in this Master of Law program in September, right? 2 years program. Offer to who? International students from Belt and Road countries. Free of charge, they'll give you accommodations, they'll give you medical insurance fee. So you're in Australia, you cannot go there. Right? So, but there is quote unquote requirement. Look at the majors. The majors are only Chinese politics, Chinese economy, Chinese law, and Chinese culture. Right? So this is actually the thing that sometimes people wonder. Why they actually do that? Right, so this is another example in Hong Kong. Hong Kong Poly, really good university. They got Belt and Road Research Fellowship. So if you actually want to go doing research, they give you basically scholarship or funding to do research with Poly U researchers there. So it's very interesting, right? So this is an exciting area for everyone, right? How is actually now considered this Belt and Road? Is it a project of the century, or is the project even of the century? Well, there are so many questions that it needs to really answer first, right? It's still actually up and down in terms of the acceptance, in terms of the rejections, but the idea is there, right? Obviously, it's a big, right, humongous regular idea or initiatives, but at the moment, it is not a silky road after all. It's still really bumpy roads for now, right? Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I think that's something I said to the Minister just now, that you learned on a Friday evening, is that you never agree to be the fourth speaker on a Friday evening, and last speaker preventing you guys from all drinks. A lot of the I guess the discussions at the moment or tonight has been to set up, I guess, the framework for what is the Belt and Road Initiative. And by the way, for those who don't know, the road actually is not physical road; it's actually the maritime route. If people are just thinking, what exactly is the road? Where is the road in that context? What I would like to do, I'm not going to talk about the general theme. What I want to do is pick up the themes that has been said in the last three speakers, and I guess I want to put it more as a personal insight to the things that I see at the Chamber, the members have asked me about it, and also in my experience in my day job as a lawyer helping this sort of companies. Whether you agree on the political grounds as to whether Australia should be part of the BRI countries or not, I'm not here to debate it. Suffice that it's pleasing to hear from the Minister that the state supports the initiative, subject to the caveats that the Minister has talked about. But I think the key thing about this is this. The BRI initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, is here, it's not going away. So the question for us is that if we take the message from the Minister, what are we doing today or tomorrow to trade with Asia? You can't get away from this concept because it is here. It is here. The Chamber has traditionally worked across not just the Chinese community, but into China, into Southeast Asia, into Asia generally speaking. And whilst we have talked about, because it's the China initiative that we talk about our links with China, I think the diagram that Hadrian showed very, very clearly is that this goes beyond the China side of it. It goes well into all the emerging countries like Laos, Thailand, Pakistan, and all that, and down to Southeast Asia and Jakarta. Why I make that point is significant in that whilst we're looking at the opportunities and we're looking at opportunities to trade as us in this room and partake if we want to in this initiative, you don't necessarily need to go into China to actually do that because you've got other jurisdictions who actually play into that initiative. One example would be, for example, that we've heard about the railway just now, about the Chongqing railway into Europe. There is one that's already built in Indonesia with the Jakarta-Bandung railway. There is the plan for the railway, for example, to Singapore to Kunming, which will make it a tremendous transportation line between that. So there is a lot of opportunities in terms of the phase one, in terms of infrastructure. But what does that mean, I guess, if you are not a big business? Because at the end of the day, if you're a big business, you would do directly with the state-owned entities. I think you quite easily, or they will be knocking on the doors. I know, for example, China Railways has been in town, in Australia, talking about acquisition of railways and technology. At the end of the day, this is not merely just infrastructure built. What the Chinese government is doing is that at first it was an industrial capacity, they want to soak up the industrial capacity that they have. But at the same time, in order to do that, just as the Minister was talking about us in the technology world, in the knowledge type industry, they want to soak that up so that they become more developed. And I guess for us in this room is how do we necessarily play into that? We will look at, for example, the opportunities in food. Now, this railway from Chongqing and to Europe or to Germany plays into that because our opportunity is not necessarily to look at building the infrastructure. Our opportunities is necessarily look at what is the growth in what is the I call it the paradigm, the things that actually have changed as such. What is the change in the transportation, the corridors that will actually help us to service into the industry. So for example, if we were going to export into Germany, for example, is it, I'm just using again that example, do we do it directly or do we do it through China into that? Is that the faster way of doing it? Then it begs the question as well, is that there are risks and there are pitfalls of going through each of its jurisdiction, and Hadrian has listed about some of the political risks, the legal risk, the credit risks, and various other risks. Who do you actually turn to? We don't have, for example, the HKTDC thing that we've seen just now, right, of that. All I know for sure is that we at the Chamber have helped out in terms of contacts and networks and assistance in terms of knowledge, but also we've worked closely also with government. I know, for example, Rob Delane here, I would say he's very well versed in Asia, in China. Well, he goes at sufficient time anyway. What he does there, I don't know, but you know, people like that, you know, you should as a small business, for example. And when I mean small business, I'm talking about, for example, if you had, to give an example, if you had a part, an equipment part that can go into a mining equipment, and you are innovative in the particular equipment part, you can still be part of the initiative, because the other side of it is acquiring the technology. So you play into that. So you're not building this massive power plant, building these massive railways. It's the little bits that will help us, not necessarily playing into this big fund that you need hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to get into. I was asked a question, I think one of the ECU team members as part of the discussion is this, that I guess I get asked that question because simply I'm a lawyer. When you negotiate that, you know, particularly in China, does the contract mean anything? You know, they're enforceable, because the story is that, you know, you have the contract and then it really doesn't mean whatever it says in there. I will say this though, Chinese contracts are actually enforceable in China. There is a rule of law, there's a court system. It's different to us. Yes, it is different to us. The biggest mistake that I constantly see with this kind of contracts is that they're written by us in Australia that don't comply with Chinese laws in the first place. So we try to enforce it. We've tried to get a judgment here, a court here to say that, and a judgment here in Australia, it can't be enforced in China. Right? And the other part of this is that a lot of us draft the documents in English, and you've got translation issues. So what I always suggest now is to make sure that you actually have the Chinese and the English. At least you start with the starting position. You actually agree what it means at the start. It helps. It really helps. But if you do have that contract that complies with the Chinese law, it's actually enforceable. It's actually enforceable in China. I think you can trust me on that. I'm a lawyer, so you can trust me on that on that point. The other part that I want to talk about is this, that if you were going into those jurisdictions, the point that was made is that you got to seek partners. I think one of the slides, you know, local partners over there, and I think that is absolutely right. For you to negotiate directly with the state-owned corporation or for every other entity, it's going to be difficult. We've been into China and other jurisdictions in Southeast Asia for many, many years, and it is difficult if you're going to go directly one-on-one. I think if you're going to do that, seek out organizations and platforms that are exactly what I said before to actually do that, because it's kind of like somebody holding your hand through that journey, so to speak, and there is a trust factor attached to it, and when you get into trouble, there is, you know, a phone a friend, so to speak, with those platforms. I have in the past, and the Chamber has in the past, tap into, if I use China as an example, our trade office in Shanghai, for example. And WA has a trade office in Shanghai for assistance on that. They've been fantastic. There's a trade office in Singapore, for example. That's been fantastic. There's none in Jakarta, I don't think. But I would say the embassy is great. Oh, okay. Sorry, I think my way around. But I have previously used the embassy to help, and it's been fantastic. So, from a government point of view, or a trade office point of view, you do seek out those ports of calls. We've done that in the past, and it does work. The last point I want to talk about is only, and this is one of the questions that I've been asked to actually address, is this: when you go up to all these jurisdictions, do you need to speak the language? In this context, Chinese to speak Mandarin. My take of it is this: I think language is important, but not as important as understanding the culture and the business. I think that should be your number one rule on that. It obviously helps, but if you don't understand the culture, you don't understand the business, you don't understand the risk, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day on that. That's all I have to say tonight. I think the rest of the points, I think, was pretty much covered by the four of us already. Happy to take any questions that people want. Thank you.